Right, so we're going to start here just explaining this 7-part structure that Abraham discovered. I think the original idea came from William Brownlee. Is that right? And then
So yeah,
Abraham
furthered
dug
it.
into his research and furthered it. But also, we want to give Cameron Briggs credit for this image. He's the one who created it.
I
And
love
it's
the
really
color coding. I love to see
yes.
it. It's way, yeah.
great visual to understand it, but I'm gonna let you explain
Okay,
it.
so not to confuse everybody, there's 2 7-part things in Isaiah, and one of them is this 7-part structure, and this one has to do with the chapters and some of the information. And the other one that we're going to talk about more today is about the actual 7 levels or categories on the ladder. So don't get confused between going through those 2. So the 7-part structure, there is a book that Abraham wrote called The Literary Message of Isaiah, and that is the one that's amazing, very analytical, and it goes through this the structure. And within each of these chapters, there's like sub themes and genres. It's really complicated, but he writes it in a way that's super fun to see. And actually, our book group is reading in this order. Instead of reading chapters 1 through 66, we're reading in order, like we see ruin and rebirth at the top here. And that's chapters 1 through 5, and they parallel chapters 34 through 35. So in essence, the first half of the book of Isaiah has parallel chapters in the second half, and they have these antithetical themes that like ruin and rebirth, rebellion and compliance, punishment and deliverance, humiliation and exaltation, suffering, salvation, and so forth. And they just to kind of give you a little bit more insight into those themes, ideas, concepts, and then they build in the latter half of the first half, second half builds more. Does that make sense? One of the other things too is I feel like I could mention is humiliation and exaltation, those chapters in the middle, they're actually the centerpiece of a chiasm of ruin and rebirth paralleling disinheritance and inheritance, and rebellion and compliance paralleling disloyalty and loyalty as you go up in the middle. And so that's how that's why the green one's in the center there, because it's actually like a key feature is this exaltation. What else can we say about that? Just something to point out, to be aware of. Yeah.
And I think this is something still I'm understanding, but as you get into some of this, you start to see how it all works together. I know there's other layered literary structures we aren't going to go into that Abraham talks about that are kind of layered on top of this.
Yeah, that's a good point to make. This is just one, and there's more within. And this one is actually called a synchronous structure. And we were going to talk about a linear one, but we ran out of time.
Yes,
it's just something to make note of. Don't worry about it, but know that it's there, and you can study these chapters in parallel with each other. And there's lots to be gleaned from reading them together.
Yeah, and finding that book is helpful literary structures. Okay. All right. I'll read this. We want to kind of introduce the next subject with paralleling with a fairy tale. You may wonder what Isaiah's writings and fairy tales have in common. The answer is nearly everything. Their common goal is that the bride and groom will live happily ever after in a heavenly palace that is also earthly. To get there, however, the hero and heroine must pass through hazards. They must learn to follow the higher wisdom that is offered them, not their own. They must trust that if they do so, then at some point their fortunes will be reversed. The hard times that befell them, the abuses and reproach they suffered to assuage others' guilt, all will then appear for what it was, an experience necessary for them to attain their goal. Without it, they couldn't have reached it. Indeed, looking back at their lives, they wouldn't want to change anything. I feel like there's a lot of examples of these fairy tales throughout, popular culture.
Oh, yeah.
And the one that came to mind first for me was that poem. It's not really popular culture, but The Pearl. I don't know if anybody's read it, but it's this exact story, and it parallels so great our eternal journey of a prince who left his family and came to this distant land to get a pearl
and fight the dragon.
Fight the dragon and not forget who he was.
Yeah, it's one of my most favorites.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, this also relates to like how we were talking earlier about there being it's like a stage with the play, and we're trying to figure out the characters and the roles, and you're entering in the middle of what's happening, and you have to figure out who you are and what you're doing, and really I feel like Isaiah actually is inviting us to participate in this role. And it's like through these through through the 7 layers, the categories of humanity, these levels on the ladder, he's actually inviting you to participate. And as you progress up, you actually, if you want, you could be the hero, right? It's like you could actually step into some really amazing roles there. And so I love the parallel with the fairy tale and also the castle, because I feel like we are going to talk a little bit about God's house and how his house works and how it's a house of order. And obviously this probably does no justice to, actual heavenly home, but I think it's so beautiful.
Maybe going a little too far, but I think it's interesting because Isaiah actually assigns roles, people to these roles. Like Jehovah is the bridegroom and the virgin daughter of Zion is the heroine. God's end time servant is the hero or the prince, and the harlot Babylon, the evil stepmother or witch. The king of Assyria, Babylon, the ogre or the giant. Angelic emissaries are fairies or secret helpers. Babylon's reprobates are ugly stepsisters, and Jacob Israel is just generic characters. So you can see this whole fairy tale throughout Isaiah as you read it. So I know we've seen this almost every slot, every time we've presented, right?
Pounding it in there. I feel like it's good to kind of see and repeat again, because you forget sometimes, and a lot of this is a little repetitive in some ways, but it starts to connect other pieces, and so the repetition's necessary.
And it hits you in different ways.
Totally.
See it again. But I think we're going to go through 3 of the categories today: Jacob, Israel, Zion, Jerusalem, and son servant. So I guess I'll review those really quick, but Jacob Israel is the blue category, where these are believers in God or people maybe haven't learned about God yet, but it's a transitory category. In the end time, either you go up or down. Zion, Jerusalem, and covenant people of God, and then son servants are God's elect and holy ones. Is there anything you want to say about this, or should we just get into it?
Just get into it. I will just mention the Isaiah Decoded book is the one that really gets into these layers and gives you lots of description and ideas of what each look like. And yeah, that's another highly recommend.
Yeah, an awesome chapter per category.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, and the yellow are the ascending categories, and the gray are the descending. I'll make sure I say that.
Yep.
Okay. Let me read.
Sure.
7 spiritual categories of humanity. Isaiah divides peoples into ascending or descending categories depending on their relationship to God. We may liken these categories to a spiritual ladder that ultimately reaches heaven. Those on any rung of the ladder may go up a step just as soon as they are willing and able to meet the conditions required to ascend. Those conditions have to do with covenant relationships. God has stipulated the terms of the covenant he makes with his people as a whole and with individuals.
So I was thinking about this and this ladder Isaiah has in these covenant structures, and I was thinking about our prophet and leaders. We use the term the covenant path all the time, and so I was thinking about, okay, how can I make this applicable to people so that's like you can take something that we know and then apply it. And so it's a covenant path, but it's also a ladder. I feel like those two are interchangeable ideas. And so really Isaiah, what he is pointing to within these covenant relationships is a progression and a pathway to Christ ultimately. And so that's, one of the places I feel like it gets applicable to who you are. And yeah.
That's awesome.
I love this image. There's a few like this where you have a ladder and then there's some beast at the bottom, and then there's these like little devils trying to pull people off, and all of a sudden you realize, this is yeah, I get it now. They're not people trying to climb into a building or like, it's like, oh no, this is a specific thing.
All right. Isaiah's writings identify 7 definable spiritual levels that one can distinguish by the kinds of people the prophet describes. Persons who appear in the book of Isaiah, in other words, exemplify progressive phases of existence, identifiable by their character traits. In his vision of a ladder to heaven, Jacob saw angels ascending and descending with Jehovah at the top. Just as he describes what he saw as the house of God and the gate of heaven, so it is on Isaiah's spiritual ladder. Angels and persons in higher spiritual categories minister to those lower, while they themselves are ministered to by ones above them. The purpose of this house or hierarchy of ascending levels is that God's children who so desire may advance from one level to the next until they attain God's presence. Their passing through the gate, signified by the veil in the temple that opens to the Holy of Holies, forms the final step in this process. I love that image. It makes me think of our, our ministering assignments that we have in each of our
Mhm.
wards, and it gives it a new meaning of finding those who need help, lifting them up, and then those above you lifting you up and teaching you what they've learned. It's a spiritual ministering that's
Yeah,
kind
kind of
important.
greater than we have probably imagined.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I like the house of God aspect too, that we know, in D&C it talks about his house being a house of order. And I've always thought, what does exactly that mean? But I think this is so applicable. It's like, there's order to everything. He doesn't wham bam throw stuff out there. It's like
Mhm.
everything's thought through. He is provided a way. All these things have all been divinely orchestrated. And so once you start to see this house and the order that it's in, you kind of go, oh, and it relates not only to people, but to the temple. And then your body is a temple, and so forth. It kind of just branches out from there.
Right, a little bit more about the ministering model. God asks each of us to love and be loved, to give and receive, to reach out and be reached. Isaiah's ladder to heaven is a ministering model that embraces everyone, in which each of us discovers he or she is important. On a Jacob's ladder, God calls those above to minister to those below. At the same time, they themselves are ministered to by someone above them, and so forth up and down the ladder. In this divine game plan, everyone performs. For example, Jehovah ministers to Isaiah, and Isaiah ministers to King Hezekiah. Hezekiah ministers to his servants, and the servants ministers to the people.
I like this because if you don't want to be a sub and sit on the bench, you don't have to.
Yeah, there's a place for everyone.
Yeah, it's like a perfect model. Anybody who wants to participate can, and your agency is respected no matter what. If you want to move up, you get to move up. If you don't want to participate, there's a place for you too. But I think that hitting the head there with the loving and being loved and serving. I think of King Benjamin, and when you're in the service of your fellow being, you're in the service of your God. It applies here too.
I think too that every person has this intrinsic need, a required need to be loved, and it's like God's perfect order to help everyone have that need fulfilled, if we're all doing our part.
Yeah, that's great. I like that.
Okay, so 4 ascending categories and temple imagery. When we perceive how God relates to his children, according to Isaiah's model of a ladder to heaven, and then apply what we learned backward and forward in time, we reach some remarkable conclusions. First, people in any age of the world, from Adam and Eve to the present, fit somewhat within the divine hierarchy of hierarchy or house of God. In the Sinai wilderness, for example, the congregation of Israel, the Levites, the 70 elders, and Moses parallel the same 4 ascending categories that appear on Isaiah's spiritual ladder.
Okay, that right there is like huge. I feel like, no, I just want to say we're going to show Ray did a really great slide in the next one, but just to like see that you can pick out people from the scriptures and be like, oh, that seems like they fit in here. Oh, it seems like they fit in here. Oh, Alma the younger. Oh, Alma the elder. Oh, it starts to piece together, and you can see where everybody throughout time, where they have been or where they were or where they're progressing to. It's just really, so that I feel like this is a really great example. We'll show next slide. Sorry.
No, that's great. And that just gives you more material to learn from, like where you are, how you moved, how you move up. Yeah, that's perfect. And it's in all scripture. So these in turn correspond with the 4 levels of purity and sanctity represented by the outer, middle, and inner court of the temple that led to the Holy of Holies, contain the Ark of the Covenant with its cherubim. Knowing the characteristics of each phase of ascent, therefore, makes it possible to match any person or people with their current spiritual level within his heavenly hierarchy. So again, here we've got like human beings, but we also have a physical temple, and we have our body as a temple, and this whole ascension and progression process through living these covenants. Yeah, so cool. But I do want to make a note. I feel like I want to motivate everybody to figure out where you're at, but like the need to compare, it needs to be just wiped out. Like you just can't do it. You can't worry about it. You can only really worry about yourself and where you're at, and work with God in that, and not worry about where your spouse is or your friends, or be like, well, where are you? I think I'm here. No. Like you and I talk about all these things all the time, but we never are like comparing, because I feel like you just don't even go there. That's not part of the process. It's really just for you and in between you and the Lord. And
between your covenants that you make with him. And
Well, from my experience, that comparing is where the adversary can sneak in and kind of derail your progress a little bit. And it's not helpful for anything.
Yeah. So one note there.
That's a really good note. Okay, so I'm gonna try and explain this. It was just a way to illustrate what we just talked about. So if we go to where is it, Exodus 19, when Moses and the children of Israel are in the wilderness, and the Lord calls Moses to the top of Sinai and says, "Hey, I want everyone to come be in my presence." And Moses goes down and is told to sanctify. The people are told to sanctify and prepare and come to the mountain so they can be in the presence of the Lord. And they didn't. They chose not to. So they put Moses between them and the Lord, which is part of their progression. And
sometimes it's okay.
Right.
Yeah, if you can't
go
beyond, right?
Right.
But at some point also you have to be willing to step further. And, ultimately they suffered for not receiving what was offered to them.
Yes. And hopefully their posterity made it a little farther, which was good. But then just comparing it to the tabernacle or the temple, this is similar to like Solomon's temple and whatnot. But also once you stretch it a little farther in your own mind of comparing it to our temples, and how we see, Jacob, Israel kind of being in the outer chamber, Zion, Jerusalem kind of working their way towards the holy place. This is the Levites who work in the temple. Son servants are those who are actually entering the holy place and performing some of those tasks that are in there. And then of course Moses, the high priest, is the one entering the Holy of Holies and atoning on the Day of Atonement for the children of Israel, and speaking with the Lord face to face. So you start to see the different progression of these categories in that story.
I think those who've gone through the temple, all of a sudden you think, oh, what an amazing progression. We changed rooms. We actually, all these things really do apply to what we know so far. And it's like this, helps.
Clues to help us understand the symbolism in the temple as we go. All right, anything more to say? I think it's kind of a silly thing, but I think when we see the Holy of Holies here in the tabernacle, it may not be the same as the room in the Holy, like represent the same thing as our temple Holy of Holies. I don't really know.
Our celestial room,
but I would more compare what happens there to our celestial room.
Yeah.
Anyway,
something to note.
Anything else?
No, it's great. I love this picture. I actually love the scripture too.
Want to read it?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Okay, so let us go up. This is from Isaiah 2, verses 3 and 5. Many people shall go, saying, "Come, let us go up to the mountain of Jehovah, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may instruct us in his ways, that we may follow in his paths. O house of Jacob, come, let us follow the light of Jehovah." So there's like about a million things I could talk about with this. And if you saw my notes on my scriptures in this one, you would laugh. But this is like a great call to Jacob, Israel, to ask them or invite them. When it says go up, let us go up, that's like very specific to ascension. An invitation to ascend. And specifically, it shows us here, it's the house of God, right? And what happens in the house of God or in the temple? We're instructed in his ways, right? To follow his paths and to follow him. So there's actually kind of a lot of scriptures that I don't know if I should take the time to hit some of them or not, but I think I'll just do it right now. Okay, we'll just go for it. So besides going up, being an ascension, it also is involved in like a pilgrimage motif that we see a lot through Isaiah. And the pilgrimage would be like to Zion and to the temple anciently, where they would go up to Zion and worship, sacrifice, pay tribute there. And that also has connections with Exodus imagery and, departing out and leaving. And part of that departure and wilderness journey is to ascend, right? So one of the other reasons I feel like these topics like the Exodus and the wandering in the wilderness and the pilgrimage to Zion are so important is because there are three of the 30 new events that Isaiah mentions that are based on ancient events that will be repeated in the end time in a little bit new and different way. So they are mentioned quite a bit there. And also there's a lot of a lot of scriptures throughout that talk about exiting Babylon, right? And that call and invitation to come out of Babylon.
Let's do that to go up.
Yes.
No.
Yeah. And I think you spiritually have to do that first before you can physically leave on any kind of exodus or physical journey. So, also the other thing I felt like was important is the temple, not only the physical temple, but our body as a temple, is a place to receive instruction, and that could be revelation or, in any way, shape, or form. And so that word instruct, I'd actually looked that up back when we read this chapter in book group, and there was a lot. If you look up that word instruction, there's a lot of scriptures that talk about being instructed of the Lord. And let's see, I'm just going to read a couple that I thought were applicable and interesting. First Nephi 17, 18, and 51. And I should have made a slide, but I just came across this morning thinking to do it. So, and thus my brethren did complain against me and were desirous that they might not labor, for they did not believe that I could build a ship. Neither would they believe that I was instructed of the Lord. So the fact, it's funny, right? Like, I feel like that's something we could come across now, people not believing
you can receive that
receive.
revelation.
Yeah. And then verse 51 in that same chapter. And now if the Lord has such great power and has wrought so many miracles among the children of men, how is it that he cannot instruct me that I should build a ship? And I love that. It's like, well, if he does all this, then why wouldn't he do something for me?
Yeah.
Why wouldn't he teach me? Why wouldn't he? And so I just love that. It's like, oh, Nephi, what a sweet,
He's the greatest.
Another one is Abraham 1:1 and 2. And he says, in the land of the Chaldeans, at the residence of my fathers, I, Abraham, saw that it was needful for me to obtain another place of residence. It kind of hints to a little, exiting a place that's not working for you anymore, right? And finding, there was greater happiness and peace and rest for me. I sought for the blessings of the fathers and the right whereunto I should be ordained to administer the same, having been myself a follower of righteousness, which all of a sudden, when you think, this kind of hit me the other day, I was like, oh, righteousness, like in Isaiah, like righteousness, like the servant and the Lord. And he's a follower of righteousness. Okay. Desiring also to be one who possessed great knowledge and to be a great follower of righteousness and to possess a greater knowledge and to be a father of many nations, a prince of peace, and desiring to receive instructions. And I just thought, oh, look, here we have Abraham desiring, as part of his desire, to receive instructions of the Lord so that he can accomplish and do all those things, to become a rightful heir, high priest, and holding the right belonging to the Father. So it's kind of cool.
Well, I remember when I read this a while ago, I'm like, how did he even know this existed? Like, how did he know about these promises? And I think it's that desire and that seeking of the greater knowledge, right? Starting to see clues of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Seeing what other people have done. And
I think that helps the whole process, is starting to realize what's potentially offered to you, what's available. Because if you don't even know what's available, you don't know what to ask for.
Right. Totally.
Yeah. And then let's see, one more we've got in Isaiah 48:17. Thus says Jehovah, the Holy One of Israel, your Redeemer. I, Jehovah, your God, instruct you to your good, guiding you in the way you should go. And so we've got just right here, like the Lord tells us that he instructs us to our good and the way to go. And good, as we talk more about covenants maybe later on, not today, another day, good represents covenant keeping. And so that's, if he's instructing us to our good, he's instructing us how to keep covenants. Yeah. And then one more, Ether 4:11-12. Let's see. For because of my spirit, he shall know that these things are true, for it persuadeth men to do good. We just talked about good, right? And whatsoever thing persuadeth men to do good is of me, for good cometh of none save it be me. I am the same that leadeth men to all good. And I thought, oh, here we've got this whole aspect of the Lord instructing and leading, and his spirit being that which leads to do good. And so that's really what we're discovering. One of the things we're discovering through reading Isaiah.
And through learning about this path.
Yes.
Thank you.
Sorry, I know it was a little detour.
I love it when you do that.
It makes it more fun. It's more fun when you can apply it all over.
All right. So this kind of is a lot in one slide, but bear with us because it's interesting. So we're still discussing the Jacob Israel category. Although they believe in the God of Israel and practice a form of religion, people in the Jacob Israel category become lax in their devotions and blame him for their misfortunes instead of repenting of their sins. A chiastic pattern parallels Jehovah's unwariness with the unweariness of those who ascend. So we tried to parallel with the colors here. You can see, we'll read this, the scripture. Maybe I should have done that first. Oh well. Just a short chiasm where Jehovah's unwariness parallels the unwariness of those who ascend, and the people's wariness parallels the youth's wariness. Jehovah thus regenerates or recreates those who hope in or wait for him, even to their ascending spiritually and physically to the seraph level.
There's a lot of hoping and waiting in
Mhm.
Isaiah, I feel like. And in life too, right? It's like that law of the last minute. It's like you are hoping and waiting, and it's a test until the last second
Mhm.
sometimes to see what you'll do. Yeah.
Which is good. And I love Isaiah often will sometimes like give us the bad news and then give us some good news too.
Totally.
But I should read the scripture.
Mhm.
So this is from Isaiah 40, 27 through 31. So why do you say, O Jacob, and speak thus, O Israel? So this is how we know that we're speaking right now to the Jacob Israel category. He makes it pretty clear. Our path has become obscured from Jehovah. Our cause is overlooked by our God. Is it not known to you? Have you not heard? Jehovah is the God of eternity, creator of the ends of the earth. He does not grow faint or weary. His intelligence cannot be fathomed. So there we learn about Jehovah. He supplies the weary with energy and increases in vigor those who lack strength. Youth grow faint and weary, and young men slump down of exhaustion. But they who hope in Jehovah shall be renewed in strength. They shall ascend as on eagle's wings. They shall run without wearying. They shall walk and not faint. So that's the great hope in the end. I think what I see here is, starting with Jacob Israel, you can realize this last category, which is actually pointing to the seraph category. Like someone on the Jacob Israel category is invited, and it is possible to make it to that point.
Which is kind of unfathomable for
Yeah.
us in a way, right? We've got the three Nephites. We see a little bit of translation and what that looks like in the scriptures, but to think, can that be offered to us? Is that real? Right?
Yep.
But here it is. It's like he's contrasting these two, showing Jacob Israel, keep going. This is what's available if you will, seek me in this path. One of the other things, just pointing out, and with the blue and the green, is showing the difference between Jacob and Israel. That in bold there it says our path has become obscured. This is like a little bit of a different time frame where they're kind of calling out to God, and he's telling them, well, haven't you heard? Don't you know? But this pathway that for them at this moment is obscured. When we talk about the Zion Jerusalem level, it really starts to open up, because this category, idolatry, causes spiritual blindness, and it's hard to see. So there is this pathway that Isaiah talks a lot about, and there's quite a few scriptures on it. And I would say it's the pathway of ascension, but it's also the pathway out of Babylon into Zion. And so just remember, there's multiple aspects to it. Oh, one other thing I just realized I didn't mention.
Okay.
So this is something I noticed, and I thought it might be fun to talk about just for a second. It says youths grow faint and weary. Youths, and then it says underneath that, young men. So I was thinking in regards to progression, and how if an infant or a newborn, right, it's like you nurse and you have milk, and then you're a toddler and you start moving to solid food, and then you're a child, an adolescent, young adult, and then like the full progression would be to be a mature adult. And so here it's kind of showing that this Jacob Israel category, they're youths or young men, and they grow faint and weary. It's like they haven't progressed up to maybe what the seraph status would be, as like a full mature adult, if you wanted to draw that. I like that parallel. Yeah.
Well, I want to kind of make clear, because you alluded to this, like these keywords, or maybe not keywords, but these phrases: renewed in strength, ascend on eagle's wings, run without wearying, walk and not faint. Those are clues to translation. So I know you said that, but I just want to make like that's something that I don't think I understood for a long time. And when we see those in other places, they can kind of trigger that. Oh, is that what he's talking about?
What are we talking about here? Yeah. I mean, what does it mean to run without being weary?
Right.
Can you imagine? I'm a runner. So like for me to be able to run and not get tired.
I'm not a runner. So
it appeals to me a lot. I'm always trying to do that. But and then the renewed in strength, that the Lord will renew you both physically, spiritually, and the ascension onto eagle's wings. We've got so many good things. Like we've got Revelation 12, where the woman Zion's given the wings of an eagle, and she departs into the wilderness. We've got the bird of prey from the east, who is Entine's servant. There's quite a few. There's lots of. Oh, we were talking too about birds. There's so many birds. We can wait till we talk about doves.
Yeah, we have more. We have more. birds.
Yeah, more bird imagery.
Okay.
I love
Right.
it.
That's awesome.
Is this our last Jacob Israel slide? We still have more.
We
We try to spend a few slides on
Yeah, we
each
got
of
two.
these categories just to kind
Okay.
of give you an idea, so you can see what it looks like in the scriptures and how to recognize it. And go ahead.
As Jehovah's collective servant, the Jacob Israel category loves its idols, things of men's own making, more than its God. The result is a spiritual blindness to the truths of God that guard his people against enemies at home and abroad, without their even being aware of their fallen state. We kind of already talked about wariness as a chaos motif, taking the form of not calling upon Jehovah to thank him or petition for oneself or for others. And so, yeah.
So, weariness represents this Jacob Israel category.
Mhm. There was something else, but I don't remember now.
I'm sorry, I cut you off.
No, you did it. You're fine. But you do not call upon me, O Jacob. You have grown weary of me, O Israel. Yet I require not that you bring me offerings from your flocks or pay me homage by sacrificial slaughter. I have not burdened you with oblations or wearied you with burning incense, nor have I burdened you to buy me the fragrant calamus or sate me with the fat of immolations. Yet you have burdened me with your sins, wearied me with your iniquities. I think when I was reading this morning, it hit me for the first time, like we have not, as a people, a covenant people, been asked to do sacrifices like they were in Moses' time. So it just hit me even more. I'm like, I think he's really talking to me. He's really talking to us, because he said, I'm not making you do all this. And yet still you're burdening me with your sin.
I know, you're still a burden.
I know.
It's like, oh, okay, well,
Yes, we are. We're trying really
not
hard.
be a burden to you, right? And
Well, and that's a good question. I think for me, it's been really important to process through is, what are my idols? Because I think idols can be things you don't even expect. Anything that distracts you from the Lord or from learning or ascending can be that. And it's hard to ask that question. Ask the Lord, what are my idols that I don't see, and how do I get rid of them?
Way hard. And you kind of have to like keep progressively doing it.
Yeah, it's not a one-time deal.
We're willing to get rid of one and let one go. And it's like, then other one's like, no, I'm not willing to give that to you, that, but Lord, I'm sorry. And then, so there is like this struggle and battle of that, on every level of this ladder. But I do like just to point out with the blue and the green, the green being the Lord and the blue being Jacob Israel. It's just that, by not calling upon him, that is what makes us so weary. And he's like, well, I haven't burdened you, but here you burning me. So there's just like, it's almost like a little chiasm right there of ideas. And he's just asking us to call on him. Yeah. Okay. Which is a whole nother topic that I feel like could be really fun to go over. Well, were you going to mention ether, and where is that in ether 2:14? I feel like it was in one, or maybe I wrote that as a note. It might not have been you, it might have been me. Yeah. Oh no, but, you're right. Yeah. And ether 12, one of the things, or ether 2, sorry, not 12, ether 2:14. He says, and it came to pass at the end of 4 years that the Lord came again unto the brother of Jared and stood in a cloud and talked with him. And for the space of 3 hours did the Lord talk with the brother of Jared and chastened him, because he remembered not to call upon the name of the Lord. So the brother of Jared's not at the Jacob Israel category here, but he's at a higher level because he's interceding on behalf of his people. But 3 hours, the Lord telling you, you haven't called upon me. Yeah, like that's a little bit of a bummer situation. So, it's not just Jacob Israel, but everybody is supposed to be calling upon the Lord. And there's more to that. But all right, we're running behind. Are we? Jacob Israel consists. That's okay. We have a lot of good things, and we'll just keep going, and it'll be great. Jacob Israel consists of believers in the God of Israel who haven't as yet covenanted with him or repented of their sins. So in Isaiah 42, who among you hearing this will take heed of it hereafter and be mindful and obey? Again, green representing Jehovah, or higher category. Who is it that hands Jacob over to plunder and Israel to despoilers, if not Jehovah, against whom we have sinned? For they have no desire to walk in his ways or obey his law. So this to me signifies the Jacob Israel category that does not desire to ascend or come out of Babylon. Isaiah 44, ponder these things, O Jacob, and you, O Israel, for you are my servant.
I've created you to be my servant, O Israel. Do not disregard me. I have removed your offenses like a thick fog, your sins like a cloud of mist. Return to me. I have redeemed you.
I want to say more, but I also
Do.
feel like we should hurry.
This is a really good one.
Well, 44 here. I underline, ponder these things, do not disregard me and return to me, because like look how beautiful that is. The Lord's like, he's begging this category of people, like, come on, please, I want,
find
yeah,
me.
come find me. And to be, created here and to be recreated, we kind of talk about rebirth and recreation, not just as it's not a one-time birth and
Mhm.
created. We forget that it's cyclical. Each time you ascend, there is,
Reborn every
yeah,
time.
you die to your old self and are reborn new. And I was thinking this morning about the thick fog and cloud of mist in First Nephi, where the mist of darkness, and the people they're trying to hold on to the rod, and there's this mist of darkness that comes in. And I was thinking of the rod being very similar to the covenant structure in this path.
Totally.
Yeah.
Love that. All right. So at this point, like we've said, Jacob Israel, you choose to go up or down. Isaiah's 7 spiritual levels reveal a kind of systematic theology that defines a pattern of covenant relationships with Israel's God, or the lack thereof, while ascending levels are governed by covenantal requirements pertaining to each phase of ascent. For much of humanity, the Jacob Israel level acts as a pivot point. From there, people either ascend to Zion, Jerusalem, or descend to Babylon.
So people can stay on this level for quite some time, but then as the end time gets rolling, there will be a point in time where they either need to go up or go down, because it'll be from that category down will be wiped out. So that's why I feel like it's kind of a up or down
Important to
situation.
change, important to choose. All right. Ascending to Zion, Jerusalem. As we have seen, people ascending to Zion, Jerusalem are primarily concerned with repenting of transgression and returning to God. They deal with the basic issues of life as they establish a covenant relationship with him and keep its terms. By passing tests of loyalty, which God orchestrates for them, they show their allegiance to him. They reach a critical point in their journey up the ladder when they know God has forgiven them their sins. Their repentance is realized when, with God's help, they cease to do evil and learn to do good. Once cleared of the burden of sin, they become serviceable to God. Having ascended to the Zion Jerusalem level, they are ready to help others do the same.
We talked about good before being a word that represents keeping covenant and learning to do good. Actually, from Isaiah 1:17, it says, learn to do good, demand justice, stand up for the oppressed, plead the cause of the fatherless, appeal on behalf of the widow. And so there's like a little definition of what it means to learn to do good. And the fact that it's saying that we need to learn to do good implies that maybe we aren't doing it. Right?
Yeah.
Like, oh, shoot.
Yeah.
So doing good's another good term to search. I feel like
Yeah,
that's a
figure out
really
what
fun
that
one. Yeah, especially
really
throughout the Book of
means.
Mormon, actually D&C too. Yeah. Oh, wait, do you want to talk about, let's see.
Do you want to talk about sin and transgression?
Yeah. Well, let's see. I guess just one of the biggest things that represents, or that you could know you're on this level, is this remission of sins and knowing that you're okay with the Lord in that regard. And so I would say that's like the biggest key feature.
That doesn't mean you don't make mistakes, and
No.
that doesn't mean you don't still screw up.
Yes.
But it does mean, I think, that you have changed from sinning to not desiring the sin anymore.
Learning
and
to
not-
do good, but actually wanting to do good too.
Mhm.
You want to. Yeah.
And that's something that's different than, anyway. Okay.
Yeah, just
We'll
different
go.
than just basic baptism,
Yes,
right?
yeah.
It's like some step beyond.
All right. The Zion Jerusalem category comprises persons who covenant with God, whom he calls my people, and whose sins he forgives. In Isaiah 40, 1-2, it says, comfort and give solace to my people, says your God. Speak kindly to Jerusalem. Announce to her that she has served her term, that her guilt has been expiated. She has received from Jehovah's hand double for all her sins. That's kind of just what we talked about, that the sins have been redeemed at that level. And
yeah, she's paid a price. And I never looked this cute pregnant as this little gal in here, but yeah, I love it being compared to serving a term, right? It's like once it's paid for, once you've maybe suffered under those covenant curses, and you've tried to live righteously with that opposition, finally the Lord reverses that. And it's kind of an amazing experience.
All right, the Israelites under Moses briefly attained the Zion Jerusalem level when they inherited the promised land. Those who
So wait,
didn't-
so pause. That's
oh,
really
yeah.
interesting, right? Because you look at all these scriptures and it's like, so wait. So the Israelites under Moses, so they reached the Zion Jerusalem level when they inherited the promised land, but this was the second generation, right?
Yeah,
Not
it
those
wasn't
who
the
died in
first.
the wilderness, right?
Yes.
So it took that long, like a whole next generation, for them to finally live up to that. So just something to point out. Really interesting to actually be able to see that. It's cool.
And do you think the first generation paid the price in order for the second generation to ascend? Maybe.
I wonder, it's like, or did
Yeah.
it take that long, or were they that stubborn, or
Yeah. What
did
was
it
that?
take, I don't know. Yeah, or maybe they were working through so many covenant curses that it wasn't till that next generation. And hopefully maybe at some point, not today, but we could talk about sin versus iniquity, because I feel like that is another key aspect to this.
Yeah. Right. Those who didn't perished in the wilderness. The latter became a type of God's wicked people who failed to ascend at the end of the world. Those who did ascend in Moses' day forsook their false gods in favor of the true God and kept the terms of his covenant. Because of the promised land, divine protection and enduring offspring comprised the chief blessings of the covenant. God's people could not inherit the land any other way. As noted, it wasn't enough that God had promised the land to their ancestors. He required that they themselves should qualify for it by living his law. I love that last statement, that they had to qualify as well.
Yeah, I think qualify is a different aspect than like earning something.
Yeah.
Qualifying, I don't know how to describe it, but it's like you're living God's law, the terms of his covenant, and thereby you qualify for more. It's not like you earned it, but you qualify. I don't know how to explain the difference, but
I think there is, though.
Yeah.
I loved going through and studying the Old Testament through all of this, because then you can start to see this process kind of going, like happening over and over again.
yes,
As the Israelites were going into, being destroyed because they were garnering covenant curses again, because they were getting into idolatry, to then
yeah,
kind of going up and down in this
it's
whole
a
process.
cycle. And then also just those three chief blessings: the promised land, divine protection, and
Mm.
enduring offspring are kind of a key feature.
Right, you were talking about earlier not seeing things clearly. This is where, in this level, things start to become a little more clear. Isaiah 30:19-22. O people of Zion, O inhabitants of Jerusalem, you shall have no cause to weep. He will graciously respond at the cry of your voice. He will answer you as soon as he hears you. Though my Lord, I'm sorry, I gotta stop there, because I think it's really important that our prayers can be answered right away, many of them. And I think it's something I know for a long time I didn't think was possible, but now I know that he will hear you and answer you as soon as
Yeah,
Anyway,
it's true. I used to
that's
think
more
there
of
was
a-
like a delay. It's like, oh, I
Yes.
haven't earned it, or I'm not worthy enough. I know they'll
Yes.
answer me, but it won't be this moment. And then I had this moment where all of a sudden I realized, what if he answered me right as I asked? And then to have that happen, it's like, oh my gosh, he is there. He's there. It's just,
and it may not happen every time,
yeah,
all the
no,
time, but
yeah,
it's
but yeah.
possible. Okay. Though my Lord give you the bread of adversity and the water of affliction, yet shall your teacher remain hidden no longer. For your eyes shall see the master. Your ears shall hear the words from behind you, saying, this is the way, walk in it. Should you turn left or right, you will discard as unclean your graven idols plated with silver, your cast idols gilded in gold.
So this Zion Jerusalem category, something to point out is like, just because you make it up a notch, there's still repenting going on. There's still, here's the bread of adversity and the water of affliction. And like it says, it's the Lord that gives it to them.
Mhm.
So that's just part of the process, is seeing these descent phases during each level. And then there is ascent. But another thing to notice where it says, my Lord, your teacher, the master. I love that. It's like
Mhm.
three different aspects of who Jehovah
Who
is.
Jehovah is,
Mhm.
exactly. And at this level, we're still discarding these idols as well. You will
I
discard
feel like it's
and
a
clean out.
it's a forever process. I don't know what the
Yeah.
end of that looks like, but I'm curious. So they see and they hear and are receiving direction. This is the way to walk in it. So that would imply like revelation to some degree, and whatever kind of revelation, whatever that looks like. Yeah.
All right.
Oh, finally, the sun servant.
Onto the sun servant category.
Okay.
So rising above the Zion Jerusalem level on the ladder to heaven are persons to whom God refers in familial terms as his sons and daughters who assume a greater role on behalf of his people. These choose to serve God by serving their fellow human beings. They minister spiritually to levels below their own while they themselves are ministered to by ones above. God makes a covenant with his sons and daughters individually, not just collectively as he does with those of Zion Jerusalem. That individual covenant is first conditional, depending on the person's fulfilling its terms, then unconditional. When it becomes unconditional, God himself ministers to his sons and daughters. I think hopefully if we ever at any point start talking more about the covenants and the covenant structure, we'll learn about unconditional, conditional covenants, collective or individual.
Yeah, something to
But know
note
that
for now,
they're-
but yeah,
they're
it's a
there.
big part of it. Yeah, but yeah, we're not enough time now to go into it. Dang it.
All right. Persons who ascend to the son servant level, on the other hand, are primarily concerned with things beyond the forgiveness of their sins. By tending to the spiritual and material needs of others, they follow God's example, developing his attributes and character traits. Although all too aware of how far they fall short, as they lean on God, he strengthens them in their struggles. They become examples of righteousness by serving as God's agents of deliverance and salvation to those less fortunate than themselves. In the course of performing these roles, their relationship with God grows to fruition. Thus, they go on to perfection to sanctify their lives in the service of God.
So one distinct difference between Zion Jerusalem and Son Servant. Zion Jerusalem, you worked on receiving a remission of sins. But the Son Servant level, you're still working through iniquities, which if we had time, we talk about the difference between sin and iniquities. But just something to note that working through iniquities and suffering on behalf of other people there's sanctifying that happens there, and those are removed. And that helps you, continue on in perfection.
Perfect. And there are examples of this category throughout the scriptures. Like a few would be Deborah and Gideon, Hezekiah, some of the judges throughout the Old Testament. So God's sons and daughters consist of those whom God gathers to Zion in an end time exodus. Isaiah 60, nations will come to your light, their kings to the brightness of your dawn. Lift up your eyes and look about you. They have all assembled to come to you. Your sons shall arrive from afar, your daughters shall return to your side. And Isaiah 43, do not fear, for I'm with you. I will bring your offspring from the east and gather you from the west. I will say to the north, give up, to the south, withhold not. Bring my sons from afar, my daughters from the ends of the earth, all who are called by my name, whom I have formed, molded, and wrought for my glory. And I'll let you talk about that form, molded, and wrought. Really cool.
I know we were talking about it yesterday. It's like you see, again, this progression of being formed, molded, and wrought. And we've got throughout Isaiah, the Lord is like a potter, right? And he's forming, molding, and rotting. He's creating these vessels, and people are vessels throughout Isaiah, and they represent. There's different kinds of vessels, lesser containers and greater. And so to go through this progression where you're finally wrought, it seems like that parallels, the refiner's fire and gold, silver, which represent an elect category. Yeah. Or precious stones. One time my mom was like, precious stones, like that happens through the process of heat and, the earth and this creation and pressure. And I thought, that's another great little parallel to this. That's probably enough for that, huh?
Yeah, we could keep going.
It's hard,
I always wanted to sit and ponder on for a long time. Another scripture in Isaiah 68-9. Who are these aloft like clouds, flying as doves to their portals? From the isles they are gathered to me, the ships of Tarshish in the lead, to bring back children from afar, and with them their silver and gold, to Jehovah omnipotent your God, to the Holy One of Israel, who has made you illustrious. I love that we're bringing back that this category is being brought back to Jehovah omnipotent to be in his presence.
The dove imagery is really pretty. Back to our birds, we were talking about how, Christ talks about being the hen who, wanted to gather little chicks in his wings there. There's a lot of really beautiful bird things that happen. But so doves actually do represent the children or sons in Isaiah 7, son servant category. And we've got Hezekiah, who is also on that level as an example. And we were talking yesterday, I was saying, doesn't he murmur like a dove when he's in his descent phase? Or, and that's, it's such a beautiful description of that. What else? Oh, Rodolfo, I want to know who Tarshish is.
Yeah, we're both like
Mental note. I don't know who Tarshish represents, but when we were going over this, I was like, oh, interesting.
I looked it up this morning.
Did you? Oh,
Learned a few things, but
okay,
nothing
good.
that's totally helpful. Okay, love it. So we're going to talk real quick about the descent ascent phase, which is something that we've alluded to a few times. But I just like this image because I feel like sometimes when you get into a descent phase where something's really hard and you're not quite sure what's going on, but you're trying to learn from it so you can ascend, you don't realize that you really are ascending along the way. It's an up, down, up, down, up, down, but continually finding your way higher and closer to the Lord. So those descent phases have purpose.
Totally. I love spiral staircases for this whole thing.
I love this one. This one's beautiful. In Isaiah's structure, ascent to a higher level is preceded by a temporary descent. That descent consists of the test of faithfulness. God orchestrates for each individual. That descent or test involves a period of suffering. It acts as a personal trial of one's faith. By means of that trial, a person learns more of God's character traits as well as his own. Ultimately, as one adopts God's character traits, one comes to know God himself.
It works just like this. It really does.
It really does.
The Lord, they're so personal, right? All of our trials, they're so personal to what we need, things we need to overcome, things we need to potentially evaluate or reevaluate in our life. And I feel like, if you can make it through some of those, you are endowed with more love, more kindness, more
grace.
Yeah, more of these attributes that God himself is.
And we know that Jehovah went through a greater descent phase than anyone. And so he shows us this pattern.
Because he descended below all,
so that he could ascend below all. And the descent does equal the ascent, I believe.
It's and
it
even
gets
the
harder.
higher you go, the
Mhm.
greater the descent. So if you're, you want to rise to that seraph level, I can't even imagine what that descent phase looks like. So, but
Job comes to
yeah,
mind.
yeah, but but the Lord prepares you in all these things.
Yeah.
That's another great word to search out, is the preparing and preparation that does go along with it. Yeah.
God designs our circumstances in life to facilitate our climb up the ladder. When we align our lives with God, we take full advantage of what life offers us, including the hard things. Every person Isaiah describes, himself included, experiences just that, a personal set of circumstances and challenges. During the whole process, God reveals himself as a willing friend to aid us along life's path. I mean, what greater way to come to know the Lord than to have to need his help all the time?
I think you just hit it on the head there. And specifically on that son's servant level, there is a horrible test, obviously, that would have to come, because that typically is a level where Christ does appear to you and minister to you. And I can see why you would need that, right? It's like you need him at some point here. Starting with revelation and working with him spiritually, but then to actually be in his presence or receive him in whatever form he shows himself.
Like, yeah.
I love this stained glass.
I know. We just wanted to make sure that we understand that all this is a process to come to Christ and to be more like him, and to understand just learning this ladder and the way it kind of works. It's like, okay, look, there's a way I can do this, and I understand it a lot better, and it seems possible.
Yeah, I mean,
to become worthy to be in his presence and to
Christ is at the top and he said,
Yeah.
come follow me. I mean, I can't help but be like, well, this is the way.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, there's lots of things that incorporate this way, but I feel like Isaiah is really pointing to these greater laws that you participate in covenants as you move through these structures.
Yeah.
And but to have him at the top of it, there's no doubt that the God of Israel, Jehovah, is Christ, and that he is everywhere in the book of Isaiah. If you're concerned that he's not, he is everywhere. he's everywhere, and he's the whole purpose and point of it.
The whole purpose, the whole way, the whole reason for being.
Yeah.
Well, and I guess I just short and simple, I do want to bear my testimony that I know Christ is our Savior, and that through some of these things we're learning, we can come to know him better and be in his presence. And what's greater than that? Well,
Yeah.
Probably.
I don't know. Yeah, I can definitely say that the fruits of going through these structures have borne knowing of Christ that I didn't have before, and it continues to be the fruit is just, it's delicious, and you just want to constantly have a little bite all day long and snack on it.
And to share with other people.
Yeah, and to share. Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah. So Rodolfo,
Back to you.
back to you, sir. Thank you,
That was
everybody.
awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. Well, thank you guys. So excited. I have so many things that came to my mind while you guys were going through the scriptures, and I have a couple of things to run to ask you. One is on the bifid structure at the beginning. What are the benefits to read Isaiah through the bifid structure?
So that structure is the one that we first showed with the super cool color coding there. The reason, well, you definitely need to pick up the literary message of Isaiah to help you see all the different aspects that are in that. But so this is about how we're reading the book of Isaiah for book group this year. And I had never read these chapters together, but I'm amazed at how they go together. And if you took all the time to do it, linearly, you would forget what you were learning in chapters 1 through 5 by the time you finally came to 34 and 35. So they actually do. They complement each other. And what you learn in the first half, it starts to build further, and then it really brings it together.
It gives you the big picture for that
Yes.
one level instead of piecemeal.
Yeah. And what else? You could probably answer that too,
Mhm.
Rodolfo, since
I will say that, I will read the a few times, chapter to chapter, to get the idea of the structure of the chapters and so on. But then eventually, when you read them through the 7-part structure, things makes much sense. So I think the benefit to me is this year has been that I can then see how things happen, go back, and then things make, I don't know, it's like a circular thing that help you to see things that otherwise before I didn't see. So it's definitely very helpful. Another question is on Debbie ask, how do you relate these to the degrees of glory? Can you put them in like celestial, and celestial? And she mentioned specifically Jacob, Israel, celestial, then Jerusalem, terrestrial, and sons and servants, celestial. What's your mark?
I've definitely played with that, and I
Yeah.
think that there is a way to kind of see that parallel.
I would say that's fairly accurate, but the son servant level, because there's covenants and blessings that are offered there, but then you have to be proven loyal, where then they become unconditional. That's kind of like there's wiggle room in there. So I could say once you've received and
the unconditional
unconditional aspect,
of
and
that
I would
covenant.
say I think that's celestial.
Yeah.
I mean, seraph's definitely obviously celestial, but I think it's super fun to go and then try and see where you can apply those things, and definitely Zion, Jerusalem, terrestrial, Christ ministering there, and celestial. Rodolfo, you'd say that for Jacob, Israel, right? You just did a whole spiel.
Well, Jacob, Israel, right now is fine. And the book of Revelation, that's the lukewarm that the Lord really repudiates. You need to go up or down. And then celestial category, if you really read section 76 and section 88, they're going to be destroyed. They need to be removed for the millennium to come, for Christ to minister. So the earth will also ascend to a terrestrial. So that will be technically Zion up, and that's what I did a post on the nations of that Isaiah prophesied from Isaiah 13 to 24. So if you are reading who the nations are, Babylon, Philistia, and Moab, Ephraim, Damascus, Egypt, and Tyre, and all of that, they Isaiah is hinting a quality of them that belongs to the lower categories: idolatry, secret combinations, they fight against Zion, and they forget the Lord. Some of them they're trying to, right? Like you mentioned, Ray, about idolatry. They have the Moabites. They have temples, they have churches, they were praying, but they were not bringing forth righteousness and the fruit. So for some of them, the oracle becomes conditional. They can ascend, they can go to Jerusalem, or they will be destroyed with the king of Assyria. And that's why when you read section 76, excuse me, that the celestial people suffered the wrath of God and his vengeance. In the book of Isaiah, that's a literal thing with the king of Assyria. That's in Isaiah chapter 10. He's the wrath of his anger, and to a nation deserving of my vengeance, and so on. So the king of Assyria what Isaiah is showing us is that the whole Babylon category from chapter 16 to 24 is going to be removed through that end time figure that the king of Assyria represents. And then people will just need to go flee to Jerusalem for protection, which can be literal, but also it's a spiritual thing, like you guys are saying, ascending higher. And then that will be terrestrial and up, who will make it to that 1,000 years with Christ. Anything to add on that?
No, I mean, that was good.
No,
Yeah,
yeah.
that was a good explanation.
How do you know where you are in the ladder?
Ponder, pray, read Isaiah Decoded.
Read Decoded. We only gave like scriptural examples, but if you go through Isaiah Decoded, Abraham really does a good job of explaining further and beyond, like what that looks like and what your paradigm is as you move through each one. And so I wouldn't have known if I had not read that book and worked through it. I feel like it just gives you all it's like a to-do list almost. You can kind of use it that way.
Well, and what's nice too is I really think it has to come a little bit by revelation, in that it's hard to see, like, check off the list and think, oh, I guess I've made it because I've checked off all the boxes. But really, it's kind of a revelatory experience where the Lord can kind of testify to you, however, on which level you are, how that looks like, but minister to you, to witness to you, kind of where.
Absolutely. Being able to hear his voice and receive revelation, I would say, is key to the progression and knowing where you're at.
That's great. I think also the who you minister to, because there is a going down to, like, you try to minister below the category of people that your minister and your desire to minister also is an indication. Sometimes, if you feel that you want to be judgmental of people and condemning, probably that will be you need to reevaluate where you are. Yes, and
That's a great point.
have a good question here too, about covenants. They have two on covenants, but the word in Jacob Israel also represents a covenant, like baptism. If so, it seems more like from Jacob up will be in the subdegrees within a celestial kingdom.
I'm not sure if I understand the question.
So, what are the covenants associated with the Jacob Israel level? Baptism, right? That's part of it. Is that correct?
Well, I mean, we know that they're believers in God. I don't know if you can put baptism on there. I mean, you could, because you could be baptized and not receive remission of sins, but
Yeah.
I don't know. There are some tricky things like this.
And I think there's a difference again where we talked about the son servant category, where there's a making a covenant,
yes,
and then a receiving and fulfilling that covenant too.
Yeah. So within each level, I would say it's there's fluidity, right? So you've entered the beginning of this covenant, and then there's a fulfillment of it. So there is like some wiggle room, and then there's also like little transition in between, right? So sometimes it's hard to specifically define, and I haven't tried to define baptism on there. I haven't done that.
I think the Book of Mormon does the best job and
Mhm.
to describe what baptism really is by water, because we have right baptism by
Mhm.
fire and the Holy Ghost, but by baptism by water, it's very clear in the Book of Mormon if you read Alma 7 that you are showing a desire to enter into a covenant,
Mhm.
and that's what they're hinting. The only mention of a covenant is in Mosiah chapter 18, but that is a collective covenant that the people were making among themselves, because you're not really agreeing to that Mosiah 18 when you are being baptized today, but then you're showing to the Lord, you're showing it's a witness that you want to enter into a covenant, rather than right away a covenant. So I will make the separation, and you can find the chapters. I think Alma goes into that, and also Mosiah 18, you can read some of that, but it's that willingness to go to, and it's a conditional thing, but then when you start fulfilling those covenants and become unconditional, and then you keep moving higher. That's how I see it. And then Zion app to me is terrestrial app, not necessarily celestial.
Yeah. I agree with that. Even though I know Zion, because we talk about Zion within our like LDS understanding, and Zion is a celestial abode, right? But
Yeah.
Zion Jerusalem is different than that. So we have Zion Jerusalem as a person, place, or category. They're different.
Yep. And then what translation happens? Where does translation happens?
Do you mean like in the
ladder
of Ascension?
Yeah.
Seraph
Yeah.
category.
Yeah.
Would
I mean,
be
that's
the
a
king.
basic place to put it. Yeah, definitely.
And this is a side question from me. What about women? I think Ray, one asked me about that we don't have examples of translated women in the scriptures. What are your thoughts? Are you studying this, and how this apply to you, as you know that translation is part of the ladder? It will be part of some of the mission of the servants that are going to go out and gather the people. Do you guys have thoughts on that?
Definitely.
Always. Yeah.
Well, I think as you're working through the son servant category, that is a category where you are working as a union, and that the ultimate goal for man and wife is to be unified in their ascension, and to start to experience that unification with each other and with the Lord. And so as you're ascending through the seraph level, there's men and women doing the same tasks, and participating in all of those great things. And I think that men and women have different, and Boone's going to join the party.
Sorry, if a dog is trying to be this.
Men and women have different skills and talents, and I think they will be employed in those skills and talents at a translated state to be doing those same things.
Yeah.
Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does.
Cool.
If you think about Enoch and his people, they were all translated and going up, and I don't think that was a city of men.
No, right? No man wants that. And we have the woman Zion, right? She's also a type for women.
Absolutely.
So.
And if you read also in Joseph Smith translation of Genesis 14, the same happened to the city of Melchizedek and so on. But also translation, Abraham mentioned this from section 84, verse 33, that we see a priesthood, the order of the priesthood, which is not necessarily a priesthood ordination to administer ordinances, more than a spiritual category, the priesthood after the holy order of God. When there is a calling and election, also can be mentioned then that they are sanctified unto the renewal of the body, their bodies. And so sanctification is the key. The more sanctified you can become, the more you can renew what you were quoting from Isaiah 40:31, when they will ascend an eagle's wing. That is sanctification. So sanctification unto it means that you can be sanctified, but also there is a process that sanctification is pointing to eventually, that which is going to be that renewal, which refers to translation.
Yeah, that's a great explanation, and kind of pointing to that, the son servant category, they're working through becoming sanctified, and then that would lead up to that seraph category, which would be translation. So yeah, that's great.
And I would say baptism by water, when you decide to enter into a covenant, but then when you become sanctified, and when you receive the baptism by fire, then you start entering really into the gate, which is that Zion category. But then you can be sanctified a little bit, but again, there is a whole whack to really be sanctified unto the renewal of our bodies, and that's a process. And usually, Abraham mentioned that that only happens through suffering and service. Those two as suffering and service is when you can, and the Holy Ghost, He is the sanctifying agent. I have a couple of more. Well, Mark mentioned the ordinances of baptism and the gift of the Holy Ghost are saving ordinances and qualify those covenant holders, as long as they adhere to those covenants for entrance into the celestial kingdom. Yeah, exalting ordinances can qualify us to God's presence or the highest degrees of glory within the celestial kingdom. You want to comment on that? There's not really a question, but
well, I could just say salvation is on the Zion Jerusalem level, and then exaltation is son servant and beyond.
Yeah, and that's why the model, right, of suzerain and vassal relationship, or emperor and vassal relationship, as far as covenant theology, is so important, because almost every time you have decided to enter into a covenant, that is conditional, and there are so many implications that needs to happen for that covenant to become unconditional. And usually, when you have a conditional covenant, I think that, like baptism, and even temple covenants are conditional, then you are under the obligation. You make an oath. There is an oath too, that you are under obligation to fulfill those covenants. If not, then you receive covenant curses. The covenant curses are upon you. When the covenant becomes unconditional, when you fulfill the covenant, then the emperor, the vassal, or God, who is the one who covenants, then the thing is called a royal grant. It becomes a grant, and then the curses become upon the emperor if he doesn't abide what he's going to say, he's going to fulfill. And the curses also becomes against the people that goes against the vassal, which is interesting when the Lord said to Abraham, I will bless those who bless thee and curse those who curse you, and so on. Yeah, I think the more you understand that covenant theology, then covenants make much sense.
Yeah,
And that's
I know.
That's next on our list.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, okay.
I felt like we wanted that to be like next, but we couldn't fit them all in here, and we wanted to just at least touch upon these so you can see they're there. But the only way to understand how to work through them is to understand the covenant theology. And
I think sometimes we have this idea in the temple that you're looking to a afterlife fulfillment of them. Where actually the imitation is so they can fulfill here also in mortality, and these things can happen here. Herrick mentioned seraph are also kings and queens of the Gentiles.
Yes, I see those on the same.
The same category, right?
Yep, same category, and saviors on Mount Zion. We have an Obadiah, or there's that Davidic covenant works through both those higher categories, but yeah.
What does imply, and I know guys, you have covered some of this, but to be a king or a queen? why do Isaiah mention that?
Why do we want to become kings and queens? I know, so we didn't really get to touch upon
Oh,
that.
the implication of the title, king and queen.
What is the implication?
And this is Isaiah 49,
Well,
22 and 23.
It has a lot to do with the Davidic covenant and some of that structure you were just talking about. So we'd have to really go
Becoming an
into
heir.
that.
Yeah, becoming an heir to
exactly.
Yeah.
God and his kingdom. I mean, I think of that little castle picture in the
Mhm.
beginning. It's like, who doesn't want to become an heir and essentially, earn that?
Which requires sacrificing
Yeah.
and serving those below you.
Yes.
I mean, a king and a queen, I think we have a screwed up version of that. They are servants. They are the
Yeah.
ones who are trying to help
Yeah.
and bring up others. And
Yeah.
Also protection, right? Because that's a
Yes,
king as a
huge.
protector. That's what people want kings, because then
Yes.
there is a protective covenant associated with. And one thing that I learned, like realized, I was reading better on First Nephi 14, verse 7, when we have the great marvelous work, and two hands, one for to bring people to peace and eternal life, and the other one to captivity and to thrown down to hell and spiritual and all of that, death. And those two hands are the servant and the king of Assyria, and one is the hand of deliverance, and the other is the hand of destruction. But then for them, there won't be the deliverance. But that's why they're going to be like lions among the flock, and there was no one to be delivered at the end of Isaiah 5. That means, right, that they're not covering, that there's no covering of protection.
None can deliver, right?
No
Yeah,
one
it's
can
like none
deliver.
can deliver them. Yeah.
While a king or the servant, but it's not just the servant. That's why I love that definition, that kings and queens, because it's not the servant going to be around by himself, but there's going to be a collective effort to deliver those who wants to ascend or are ascending actually to the church of the firstborn. That's what section 77 mentioned. But yeah, I think that was interesting how you can see that there is a role for everyone in the ladder as a big team.
Yeah.
And the last one,
Go ahead, ask them.
what is it? How do you ascend? What are those principles of ascension?
well, again, that goes, well, to me anyway, goes back to covenant making and keeping and trying to understand the specific laws on each ascending level, because the Lord, like Tay talked about, being recreated on each level or being reborn, and you have to learn kind of the new rules and the new paradigm. But that comes through covenant making with the Lord, and then receiving revelation and being taught by him.
Working with him. I could give a really short example of this. Okay. Upon having a rebirth one time, I was a hairdresser for a long time. And so I've told you this before. It's like, it was very normal to like sit and be catty and talk about other people, right, while I'm doing hair. And I started to do that. And then the moment it happened, it was like, and I had this horrible feeling. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't do that anymore. And then it happened to me again. It was like, I can't do that anymore. So there is like this, when you're establishing a new covenant, a new level, there are new terms that maybe you weren't aware of or used to before. And so immediately I realized, oh, that's something I can't do anymore. If I want to, keep progressing and doing this, I can't say anything bad about anybody or talk about them. So like, that's just a really small example, but it's kind of like that within, there's certain terms and the Lord's very clear to you about what they are if you're willing to listen and hear. And some of them are defined in the scripture, some of them are individual and will be just for you.
And you work on proving loyal to those to make
Yes.
that covenant unconditional.
Yes.
And those covenants, they need to be kept under opposition circumstances. You need to prove there's a test of loyalty, and that needs to be passed. One thing that you guys mentioned that I think was very instructive was that in every even in Zion level, you're still working on things. So it's not that you get to a level and then life, there is an absence of trials or things that you need to keep working on. And there are two scriptures that came to my mind. One is in Ether 12:27, that if man wants to come unto me, I will show them their weakness. And I give weaknesses so for them to be humble, and my grace is sufficient. And I think that's it's a key part of understanding our ascension process, that the weaknesses are going to be, we are trying to be recreated until we make it to the image and the likeness and image of God. And but we're going to work through things. And then that my mind went right away to Paul in 2 Corinthians 12, when he mentioned that he was given a thorn in the flesh. And he was this man who he has this vision to the third heaven, something like that. And this amazing revelation, saw the Lord, but still he had a thorn in his flesh that he needed to keep working on. Because I think sometimes those things are for our benefit. So we can be humble and recognize that only through his grace we can keep moving forward, which give me hope, honestly, when I see it that way.
Well, I think one thing important to maybe share is that it's the Lord's definition of good and covenant keeping, and that sometimes I know for me, I'll look around and see, well, they're doing that, that's probably okay, like justifying my actions because of somebody else I think might be a little higher than me or something. But really, it's how the Lord works with you individually and what you need to be clean of. But can I ask a question before we get too late? I want to know, if we were to possibly maybe do another class, what would be the most interesting thing to cover? Like, what would people want to learn about? I don't know if people will be willing to put in the chat, or
Would you like to give options? So maybe they can.
Sure. I mean, the covenant
Yeah.
structure, obviously something we're talking a lot about.
Yeah, the Davidic covenant. I mean, the Sinai covenant and the Abrahamic covenant. Those three are ones we feel like are huge. I think just talking about the two aspects of the messianic prophecies, that they're not all equal, and showing that there's a temporal aspect and a temporal and a spiritual, excuse me. What else do we want to
Remember what else we talked about?
We have David saying, yes, covenant structure can be great.
Yeah, let's see. And now my mind is blank. I'm sorry. This is what happens when you're in front of the camera.
Yeah, if there's any other ideas that we hadn't thought of too.
Yeah.
We can send an email and get ask.
I know people always want to talk about the servant. That's always one. I would love to talk more about like the servant and the collective servant.
I think what Ray, you mentioned to me that when you understand the Davidic covenant, then the servant comes as a consequence.
Yeah, it does.
Easier to build from the Davidic covenant.
I agree.
And throw the servant in as a slap in the face for many people. But when you show that 2 Samuel 7 and Psalms 89, then okay, get it,
Yeah, that's the whole, the build up behind it. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense. And I think that's why I see when people are like, "What? That's not right." Well, of course it isn't without the background of the covenants.
One of our kind of missing covenants.
Yes, it's
one of the plain and precious.
Plain and precious. Yeah, I like that. I agree. And then just proxy savior too, being a proxy savior within that Davidic concept covenant. Yeah, it's huge.
And somebody asked about the 30 events, but probably we will ask send a message and get some reply. But yeah, you guys, whatever you feel to. Angela mentioned whatever you guys will have, she will come. So
that's very nice.
At least one person will come.
And today we had a meeting with in parallel with this, with the Isaiah Institute. So kind of half of our audience was there. But this is going to be reposted. We want to put it on. Somebody wants to have a weekly, Alana. Well, we have that in the book discussions. And I know this has been a huge stretch for Ray and Rachel, so we are so grateful for their time and all of that. But eventually, I know we have next year, we're gonna try to put more things, make things available for the people to consume from the Institute. So definitely, Alana, we will.
Look up the book groups. Those are a really good way to have that conversation and learn more.
Have a weekly,
like the Isaiah Made Simple book groups.
Yeah, we will have openings in a couple of months as we start rolling for next year. And those have been, my opinion, have really changed a lot of my learning, and they have been amazing. So
it's been really fun too.
Okay.
You're reading.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Well,
Appreciate
thank you so much, and on behalf of the Institute for you too, Ray and Rachel, we're so grateful. We cannot have better people to make this class, and the feedback that we have received has been amazing. And yeah, our prayers have been with you as you prepare for this, and also for everyone who has come with an open mind to learn more. We pray that you will take these tools and go back and read Isaiah and see now what the things you're going to see that maybe you didn't see before. And it definitely has made an impact in my life in the last 2 weeks, because some things that you guys said, I realized, wow, I missed that. And now it's another puzzle that makes the picture more clear. So thank you.
So glad. Just want to at least touch one person.
I know.
If you can just bring one
worth
person,
it.
it's worth it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay,
thank you,
thanks.
everyone.
Thank you,
Much
Elsa.
love to
Thank
all of
you.
you. Yes.
Okay, bye.
And we will keep you posted if there is another extra session that we will do for sure.
Yep.
Okay. Bye, everyone. Have a good weekend.
Bye.